Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer,
And I'm Krista Carmen.
and this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and Gentlemen. Prepare yourself for a journey into one of the most disturbing cases in all of true crime. The story of monsters, Leonard Lake and Charles Ning. The levels of brutality and inhumanity these two ex-Marines went to is beyond the realm of comprehension and absolutely soul-shattering. So remember the rules. You must be this tall to ride the murder coaster. Be sure you're safely strapped in. Keep your arms and legs inside the ride. Every trigger warning you can imagine is now in effect. And this one was a request from listener David Barnes. This one's for you, David. We hope you enjoy it. And now, let the ride commence.
Let's begin. Prologue: The Vice in the Car Trunk. Since 1898, the South City Lumber and Supply Company has been a part of San Francisco and the Bay Area, starting as a mill that cuts seasoned lumber down into dimensional boards and growing into a huge hardware and supply source that has come to take up a whopping 3.5 acres in South San Francisco, just north of the San Francisco International Airport. On June 2nd, 1985, John Callis, a reserve duty police officer looking for some hinges for a project, was wandering the bustling aisles of the hardware department.
It was a Sunday, so there were a lot of homeowners mixed with the usual lot of contractors and framers, shuffling through, grabbing their building supplies. John strolled past the drills and racks of screws, a long display of hammers, when he noticed a young Asian man by the vices. Something felt off about him, and John realized what it was. It was his coat.
It was a warm June day. Hot by San Francisco standards. But the man was wearing a large, bulky parka. Perfect for shoplifting. And he kept making furtive glances about the store. John watched as the man picked up a large, diamond brand bench vise, and instead of turning left toward the cashiers, boldly walked to the back exit and hurried out the door.
John went to the cashiers and asked them if anyone had purchased a vice that morning. They said there were no vice sales. So John told them, "Well, if no one sold a vice, then you got ripped off."
John and a store clerk named Glenn headed to the parking lot, where in the distance they saw the man set the vise down in the trunk of a copper-colored Honda Prelude. John shouted to him,
"Hey, I'd like to talk to you, pal."
But the man, apparently realizing he'd been caught, turned away from them and briskly walked toward the intersection of Spruce and Airport, rounding the corner and disappearing into South San Francisco.
John and clerk went to the Honda and the trunk was still ajar. What an idiot. That's how these stupid fucks get caught. They do something dumb because they just can't control themselves and then leave the trunk open. If he had just slammed that trunk shut, this monster would have probably gone on quite longer. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here, aren't we? I will say this, though. To think what he was planning to do with that vice is extremely horrifying. And I'll just leave it at that.
John went to the phone to call the police, surprised no one else had already done so, when a husky man with a big teddy bear quality to him, a thick beard but a balding dome, came up to him wanting to talk about the stolen vice and interrupting him while he was talking on the phone. John said to the man,
"Look, pal, I'm just a customer. Go tell it to the cashier."
Within moments, South San Francisco officer Daniel Wright was on the scene, pulling up to the Honda, which now had a gaggle of store employees around it, the trunk still sitting there open. Officer Wright looked into the trunk, seeing if there's maybe a receipt or possibly other stolen goods, shuffles past a box of pornography, and discovers a pistol, a .22 Ruger automatic. But that's not what strikes him. It's that the gun has a silencer. Silencers are very illegal. Officer Wright had never even seen one before. That's when he realized he might be dealing with a dangerous criminal. Who else might be using a silencer besides dangerous criminals?
Then that portly teddy bear looking man with the thick beard and balding head came jogging up, saying it was all a misunderstanding. His friend had taken the vice thinking it had already been paid for, but the man had gone and paid for it, so everything was now taken care of. No worries. Everything is fine. Just honky-dory.
When the officer asks the man his name, he says, Robin Scott Stapley.
But since none of these idiots had thought to maybe shut the trunk, the cop had found the silencer and the automatic Ruger. So the cop, not telling the man he'd found the gun, simply told the bearded man he had to be detained while the shoplifting crime was investigated, explaining it would probably only take a minute if the vice was paid for. And the husky man with the bushy beard was put into handcuffs.
The license plate on the Honda came back to a Lonnie Bond, and when questioned, the man said he was a friend of Lonnie Bond, who was his neighbor and out in the country. The man seemed friendly, talkative, eager to explain everything, how it was all just a simple misunderstanding. But when the officer asked him about the .22 and the silencer, the man's whole demeanor changed. He just sunk his head, dejected and defeated.
Other officers are showing up at this point, and the man was formally arrested for the silencer. Just having a pistol in your trunk is actually perfectly legal. It was the silencer that got him in trouble, especially as the barrel of the pistol had been threaded so that the silencer could screw onto it, making it an illegally modified firearm.
As the man was taken away for questioning, Officer Wright stayed with the car, curious. He ran the VIN, and it came back to a different car and owner than the license plate. It came back to a known missing person named Paul Costner, who'd gone missing 7 months earlier, after posting an ad in the newspaper for this very car, and whose sister had been very publicly searching for him, appearing on the nightly news and radio shows, distributing flyers across the Bay Area, putting an enormous amount of pressure on the police to find her missing brother.
At the South San Francisco police station, the bearded man who'd claimed to be Robin Stapley tells authorities his real name is actually Leonard Lake. He was a fugitive who'd been arrested by the FBI for 7 felony counts of weapon charges in Mendocino County, but had posted bail and gone on the lam. And that was 3 years ago. And the man he'd been arrested with during that incident in Mendocino was named Charles Ng, an Asian man whom police quickly realized was the person who had stolen the vice and then disappeared into South San Francisco.
They asked Lake if he knew where Charles Ng was. Leonard said he was probably heading to Leonard's ex-wife's house. Her name was Clara Lynn Balaz, but everyone called her Cricket. They asked him why he was driving the vehicle of a missing person, and Lake sighed. He seemed about to tell them everything they wanted to know, told them he was ready to make a statement, but he wanted a pen and paper and a glass of water before they began, saying he had to write something to his wife. Officers gave him the paper, pen, and water, and unshackled his wrists so he could write and drink, then stepped out and left him alone in the room, hoping he'd start talking when they got back.
When Detective Gary Hopper from the San Francisco Missing Persons Department heard a man had been arrested driving Paul Costner's car, he immediately hurried to South San Francisco to question him. The detective entered the South San Francisco Municipal Building, headed down the hall, where 2 police officers told him which room the suspect was in. and Detective Gary Hopper entered to find Leonard Lake lying on the floor, convulsing as white foam sputtered up from his mouth.
Paramedics were called and rushed him to Kaiser Hospital, where Leonard Lake fell into a coma and was put on life support. After running a series of tests, doctors were able to discover he'd ingested cyanide.
Given the quick effects of the poison, it was determined he must have ingested the cyanide when they gave him the water, and it was later determined to be a capsule that he kept hidden in his shirt collar.
What could a person have done that was so bad that they'd rather die than divulge their secrets?
We're going to find out, and it's not good.
Police see that what he'd written had been a suicide note, reading,
Dear Lynn, I love you, forgive you. Freedom is better than all else. Tell Fern I'm sorry, Mom, Patty, and all. I'm sorry for all the trouble. Love, Leonard.
In the Honda that had belonged to Paul Costner, police find evidence of blood spatter and an actual bullet hole, making it obvious that someone had been shot in the vehicle. They could even trace the trajectory of the bullet as coming from the back seat and going through the head of whomever was the front passenger.
They also find a utility bill from a very remote town in Calaveras County called Wileseyville, over 150 miles east in the Sierra Nevada foothills. The bill was addressed to Carolyn Balaz, Leonard's ex-wife, whom he called Cricket, the Lynn, whom he'd written his suicide note to.
Investigators go to Cricket's house on Peck's Lane in South San Francisco and interview her. She says, yes, she has a cabin in Calaveras, and she had let Leonard stay there. But they were divorced, and she never spent any time at the cabin at all, or with him. She says she knows who Charles Ng is. He was a friend of Leonard's, but she doesn't know where he is and has no idea who Paul Costner is or why Leonard and Ng would be driving his car.
Investigators want to go to this cabin, but Cricket tells them it is very remote, down a maze of dirt roads. They probably wouldn't be able to find it, and even if they did, there was a locked gate they'd have to go through. But Cricket offers to meet them in Wileseyville the next day and escort them to the cabin.
Rugged and extremely remote Calaveras County, which literally translates from Spanish into County of Skulls, has a couple claims to fame. The first is frog jumping, made famous by the Mark Twain book, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, an amusing story about a cheater in a frog jumping contest.
Yes, a frog jumping contest, and they still hold frog jumping contests to this day, believe it or not. And those fairgrounds in Angels Camp, where they are held, are famous for more than just frog jumping, for they have been a special venue for absolutely legendary shows by bands like the Grateful Dead, and would later host the legendary Mountain Air Festival. So you have to understand just how remote this place is. It is in the middle of nowhere, just deep in the forest with all these towering fir trees, stands of sequoia, and rugged, untamed wilderness. So folks are allowed to camp during concerts, and they go just pretty much hog wild. There's no rules. It's basically anarchy. I've seen Phil Lesh play there, Widespread Panic, and if you're a Primus fan, check this out. I was there when Les Claypool formed the Flying Frog Brigade, which started as basically an improv session. You can probably guess why they ended up calling themselves the Flying Frog Brigade. But anyway, it's just a great place to see a show, a great place to camp. It's really beautiful and just complete freedom.
Calaveras County is indeed so remote that the San Francisco detectives got lost trying to find it and somehow ended up 50 miles away up by Sacramento. But they eventually made it down to the tiny town of Wileseyville, where they met Cricket at the general store, who oddly enough, had brought Leonard's mother along with her for some reason.
Yeah, it's so weird. And weirder yet, Cricket says she had already been to the cabin to clean it up, as there were embarrassing and sexually explicit photos and videos of herself there she didn't want the police to see.
Smells fishy.
Yeah.
But Cricket then leads them, as well as some Calaveras County Sheriff's deputies who joined them to assist, out into the wilderness south of Wileseyville and to the Blue Mountain Road, where eventually they come to a nondescript dirt road on the right behind a locked gate. Cricket unlocks the gate for them and leads them through the tall ponderosa pines and Doug firs and into a strand of black oak on a rolling hillside where her cabin sits perched.
The cabin itself was very nice, very 70s, split level with long, gentle, sloping roofs, built where the hill rolls downward. But beside it, dug deep into the hillside, was a big, ugly monstrosity of cinder blocks that were sloppily slapped together.
Clara Lynn explained the ugly cinder block structure was a fallout shelter Leonard had built. She told them he had been a Marine who'd had a complete mental breakdown in Vietnam and was certain there was going to be a nuclear war at any moment, and had built a bunker to survive in during the coming nuclear Armageddon. She said she didn't have the keys to the fallout shelter, but let them into the cabin and told them they were free to look around.
Inside, the cabin was beyond 70s. Just everything orange and shag, like the Brady Bunch house. Out of instinct, San Francisco officer Eisenman runs his hand along the door frame, a common place people will hide drugs, and he finds 2 gelatin capsules. Very homemade looking. The halves actually scotch taped together. They'd later be determined to be filled with cyanide.
Looking about, Officer Irene Brunn with the Missing Persons Department notices some expensive video equipment resembling that which had been stolen in another high-profile missing persons case. The Dubs family, an entire family, including a 1-year-old, who'd gone missing after the husband posted an ad in the newspaper selling video equipment. Because of the timing and odd ways both Paul Costner and the Dubs family had disappeared, both after posting ads in the San Francisco Chronicle, investigators had wondered if the 2 cases could somehow be linked. Irene Brunn then goes and radios the serial numbers into the station and bingo, it's a hit. That is Harvey Dubs video equipment.
And now, looking even closer, investigators notice the bedposts have holes drilled in them so straps can be attached to them, and see what looks like blood splatter on the ceiling and a bullet hole in the floor. They realize they need to get a search warrant, that they're standing in a potential crime scene.
When Cricket discovers that investigators have radioed for a search warrant, she goes berserk and demands they leave, and Leonard's mother begins weeping and wailing about her poor son who's in a coma in the ICU on life support. But investigators aren't going anywhere. They have to remain on the scene so that nothing is touched while the search warrant is applied for. So Cricket and Leonard's mother storm off and head back to San Francisco.
Once they had a warrant, investigators began to search the cinderblock bunker. Inside was just a tool shed holding shovels and picks, a wheelbarrow, and various hardware and tools. Eerily, one wall is filled with photographs of scantily clad women. But one investigator notices that from the outside, the bunker appears much larger than just a tool shed. Looking closely at a wall of shelves, they see hinges hidden in the corner, and discover they are able to swing the wall of shelves open, revealing a hidden area.
The hidden compartment was dark and musty, and investigators later said they were filled with a sense of dread as they cast their flashlight beams inside.
They step through a tiny, dark corridor to a living room of sorts, with a bed, a table, a desk, and a dresser. There was a small bookshelf with a copy of the book, The Collector, by John Fowles on it. Even further inside was another room. It was tiny, only 3.5 feet wide by 6.5 feet long, with a foam mat and a plastic bucket in the corner beside a roll of toilet paper. A cell.
And looking it over, investigators see that the cell has been completely soundproofed. Terrifyingly, on the wall, a list of rules had been posted, which read,
Rules. 1. I must always be ready to service my master. I must be clean, brushed, and made up with my cell neat. 2. I must never speak unless spoken to. Unless in bed, I must never look my master in the eye, but must keep my eyes downcast. 3. I must never show my disrespect, either verbally or silent. I must never cross my arms or legs in front of my body or clench my fists, and unless eating, must always keep my lips parted. I must be obedient, completely and in all things. I must obey immediately and without question or comment. 5. I must always be quiet when locked in my cell. 6. I must remember and obey any additional rules told to me. I must understand that any disobedience, any pain, trouble, or annoyance caused by me to my master will be grounds for punishment.
As the horror of this place dawns on them, more and more investigators are called in to search the large property, which comprised 38 acres of heavily forested hills.
Behind the cabin, they find a 160-foot trench that had been used to bury telephone lines. The trench was filled with all kinds of weird stuff: old chairs, magazines, a car windshield, clothing. As they dig down into the refuse, they come across an old piece of plywood. But what strikes the seasoned investigators right away is the ants. Swarms of ants were carrying tiny white specks out from under the plywood. Investigators knew what those white things the ants carrying were: maggot larvae, meaning there was something dead beneath the plywood.
Lifting the rotten wood, a human skull stared back at them. Soon another body would be discovered, and another, as well as scattered bones and 6 blackened pyres where bodies had been burned and only blackened bone fragments and ash remained. The place was a literal graveyard, and bodies would continue to be found even years later after the property had been sold to a new owner. Included in the many dead, possibly up to 25, would be 2 infants.
Yes, these disgusting monsters killed babies and bragged about it.
Investigators began to fan out, using sticks to test the earth, looking for soft spots, and they find one. Buried in it is a sealed 5-gallon bucket. In it is a .22 handgun, Paul Costner's ID, as well as his glasses, wallet, and other personal effects.
Although it is obviously a killing grounds, investigators still have no idea who could have been behind the carnage. Was it Leonard Lake? Was it Charles Ng? Or was it Cricket? And why? Then an excavator operator poking around by the dirt driveway finds another buried 5-gallon bucket. In it is the typed diary of Leonard Lake and 2 videotapes, one marked M Ladies, Catherine and Brenda, the other simply M. They thumb through the diary, most of it very mundane: what he ate for breakfast, where he had gone or worked, repairs he'd done, though some of it is obviously in code, often referring to so-called operations. One in particular, named Operation Miranda, is mentioned often.
Hauntingly, one section read,
Without question, this journal is dull. The depths of my sins are not recorded.
Investigators take the videotapes into the cabin and slip the tape simply marked M into Harvey Dubb's stolen VCR. Then hit play.
An image flickers onto the screen of the bearded man who'd eaten the cyanide, Leonard Lake. He's sitting on a plush lazy boy chair with his feet up, looking contemplative and speaking softly.
And here we see the banality of evil. He isn't acting deranged or crazed, isn't shouting or ranting, but just calmly talking with a clear, smooth voice that has a friendly tone to it, though the words themselves are sinister to the extreme and chilling to the bone.
Good evening. It's Sunday, October 22nd, 23rd, something like that. Very close to my 38th birthday. And I'm starting this tape without scripts or without any real organization of what I want to say. But I do feel I need to explain. This tape, which you're hearing now, is going to be the lead-in of the various phases of construction of a building which, hopefully, will be the first of a series of underground buildings. But the main emphasis of the building, the whole justification for its expense and its effort, will be a hidden portion, a secret room, if we can call it that will house a cell, a jail cell, if you will. The purpose of that cell will be the imprisonment of a young lady who probably at this moment is unknown to me. Posterity may care less about this tape, care less about what I have to say. To be honest, I'm not too sure who I want to show this tape to, or if I will ever show it to anyone. But for anyone that is interested, anyone who needs my justification and my rationalizations as to why I would want to imprison and in fact enslave a woman, they have only to look closely at me. I'm a realist. I'm 38 years old, a bit chubby, not much hair and losing what I have, not particularly attracted to women, or should I say, particularly attracting to women. All of the traditional magnets, the money, position, power, I don't have. And yet, I'm still very sexually active, and I'm still very much attracted to a particular type of woman who, almost by definition, is totally uninterested in me. I'm a dirty, old man, pervert. I'm attracted to young women, sometimes even as young as 12. Although to be fair, certainly up to 18 to 22 is a pretty much ideal range as far as my interests go. I like very slim women, very pretty, of course petite, small-breasted, long hair. But such a woman, by virtue of her youth, her attractiveness, her desirability to the majority of mankind, simply has better options. There's no particular reason why such a woman would be interested in me. But there's more to it than that. It's difficult to explain my personality in 25 words or less, but I am in fact a loner. I enjoy peace, the quiet, the solitude. I enjoy being by myself. And while my relationship with women in the past have been sexually successful, socially they've been almost always a failure. I'm afraid the bottom line statement is the simple fact that I'm a sexist slob. I enjoy using women, and of course women aren't particularly interested in being used. I certainly enjoy sex. I certainly enjoy the dominance of climbing on a woman and using her body, but I am not particularly interested in the id, the ego, all the things that a man should be interested in to complement a woman's needs. Now I can fake these emotions, and I can fake them very well. And in the past, I've been very successful with attracting interesting and attractive women, simply because I did fake fairly well an interest in their needs and their requirements. So momentarily, I had what I wanted, and they thought they had what they wanted. But in the long term, I don't want to bother. What I want is an off-the-shelf sex partner. I want to be able to use a woman whenever and however I want. And when I'm tired or satiated or bored or just not interested, I simply want to put her away. Lock her up in a little room, get her out of my sight, out of my life, and thus avoid what heretofore has always been the obligation to entertain or amuse or satisfy a particular woman or girlfriend's whims of emotional whatevers. Such an arrangement is not only blatantly sexist, but highly illegal. There's no doubt about that. It violates all the human rights and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to spare posterity my concepts of other people's morality. I'm explaining my morality, what I feel, what I want. The advantages of such a situation are, of course, obvious and even beyond sexual. Such a woman, totally enslaved, would be useful for the mundane chores I have to do, but not particularly interested in doing. Cleaning the house, washing the dishes, etc. A slave. There's no way around it. Primarily a sexual slave, but nonetheless a physical slave as well. And I believe that if I can construct a holding cell, a place where I can put such a woman, where I can walk off and feel secure that she can't escape, that I can create a facility that is so stark, and so empty, so cold, so quiet, so totally removed from the world that fairly quickly, by a combination of painful punishments when I'm displeased and minor rewards such as music or magazines or some such stuff, that I can quickly condition, this is my belief, that I can quickly condition a young woman to cooperate with me fully, and in fact, even look forward to cooperating with me, simply for no other reason that such cooperation would be a relief from boredom. Whether I can do this or not will remain to be seen. Obviously, I've never done such a thing before, and it may not work. However, I want to try. Life as I'm living it is boring. The challenge of this project, the excitement, the thrill of it, will be an exciting experience, even if it fails. As long as I don't get caught, it's very attractive. It's something that I have fantasized about daily. We'll see. I don't think there's much more to say on the subject. This, hopefully, will be a mystery.
Excuse me while I go scrub my brain.
It's fucking gnarly, man. Dude.
So there it was. The reason why, spelled out on video, calmly and rather succinctly. But now investigators needed to know who exactly this Leonard Lake was, and how he had become this terrifying monster of a man.
Chapter 1. Little Lenny.
Leonard Thomas Lake, or Lenny as he was known as a child, was born October 29th, 1945 at St. Francis Hospital in San Francisco, California, to Elgin Lake, a 21-year-old sailor in the Navy, and his wife Gloria. The two went on to have two more children, a daughter named Sylvia in 1950, and a son named Donald in 1951. But it was far from a happy home. Elgin and Gloria fought constantly, often fueled by Elgin's heavy alcohol use, and in 1952, Elgin abandoned the family, moving to Seattle, Washington.
For a while, Gloria and her three children lived in the projects, in utter poverty, just scraping by. Leonard would later say he remembers being constantly hungry during this period of his life and never having a single toy.
Gloria then decided to follow Elgin up to Washington, but decided it might be wise to leave little Leonard with her parents in San Francisco while she got established, especially as he'd started elementary school and she didn't want his education interrupted.
At the train station, little Lenny begged his mother to take him with her, pleading as he held onto her skirt and wept, his little fingers having to be pried off so his mother could enter the train and be whisked away north as he sat in the station, watching as the train with his mother and siblings disappeared into the distance.
That is a terribly tragic scene to imagine. He was 8 years old, he'd been abandoned by his father, and now his mother, his brother, and sister were gone as well. And he'd never live with either of his parents ever again.
Within a year, Gloria was back in San Francisco, but Lenny refused to move back in with her. At his grandparents' house, he had his own room, plenty to eat, nice clothing, even an allowance. His relationship with his mother was one of bitterness, resentment, and anger. And in 1956, when Gloria remarried, Lenny refused to even go to the wedding.
His animosity extended to his siblings as well. When his little brother Donald was struck by a train at just 9 years old, he suffered debilitating head injuries and was mentally impaired, resulting in him receiving Social Security disabilities payments from the government. Because of this, Leonard would call him a leech on the state, saying he took from the system, and that anyone who received welfare should be shot.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that while Leonard would have a lifelong belief that welfare recipients were a drain on society and leeches of the system, he would never bat an eye at stealing from anyone, including taking actual welfare checks from others for himself, or selling drugs, or any of the other many, many criminal enterprises he'd later take part in.
Leonard was a bit of a scientist growing up. He'd had his own set of chemicals, which he'd play with, once causing a minor fire that he quickly put out. He also enjoyed breeding mice. Starting with just a few of the little rodents, he ended up with thousands, to the point where he had to start killing them off, as the horde was simply too great. After decapitating the little creatures, he'd try to dissolve their bodies with acid from his chemistry set, ending up with what his cousin described as a, quote, ugly green liquid.
At 17 years old, Lenny became obsessed with the novel The Collector by John Fowles.
The Collector is a 1963 literary thriller about a lonely young man who collects butterflies and decides he wants to collect women as well. He abducts a young art student and holds her in a cell he has built in his rural farmhouse. The novel is divided into two sections, one from the point of view of the man, and the other from the point of view of his captive. It received lavish reviews from critics who saw it as a Gothic-style look at social class structure, was a bestseller, and was turned into a film of the same name in 1965 that was nominated for an Academy Award.
My mom was actually a big fan of this book. I remember it from being a little kid. She did say it terrified her. But in the book, the woman's name is Miranda. And though in the book, her captive never sexually assaults or really abuses her, simply wants her as part of a collection, teenage Lenny found himself lost in sexual fantasies, where he had his own Miranda he could do anything he pleased with. And I believe the aspect of the book that examines class hierarchies was probably just completely lost on Lenny.
The novel would remain an obsession of Leonard's for the rest of his life. He would call his fantasy of one day having a cell where he could keep a sex slave his Miranda project, or using military jargon, Operation Miranda.
And Leonard loved military jargon. And just 3 months after his 18th birthday, on January 27th, 1964, Leonard joined the United States Marine Corps.
Chapter 2. Marine Lenny. Leonard took to the Marines with gusto, relishing learning all about weapons, chemicals, explosives, demolition, hand-to-hand combat, and all the different ways there are to kill a person. He became an expert in map reading and field survival, and loved the jargon, which he'd use the rest of his life, calling any project, large or small, an operation or op. He'd also wear the camouflage fatigues from the military for the rest of his life, which are affectionately called camis.
He took specialized classes to be a radar technician and was then sent to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina to study advanced aircraft radar, and would often visit with an uncle living in the area. His uncle introduced him to a young woman named Karen Lee Meinzerman, and the two started a romantic letter-writing relationship. But in late 1965, Leonard was sent off to Vietnam to work on radar equipment in the war, and the correspondence dwindled before finally coming to a close.
But when Leonard returned stateside at the end of 1966, he began writing Karen again, and soon the two were confessing their love for each other, and Leonard was proposing marriage. And in March of 1969, they were wed, and Karen moved to California to live with him.
Like many of these pieces of shit we see, during the courtship years, Leonard was very sweet and kind, supportive and nurturing. But as soon as the marriage papers were signed, he became cruel, domineering, and insulting, absolutely controlling of everything she did and treating her as a servant. But then, in a crazy rash move, after just a year of marriage, Leonard volunteered for a second tour of Vietnam and was soon in the jungle of Southeast Asia.
Later in his life, Leonard would boast about his kill count, saying he loved being in the jungle, killing, out on patrol, searching to destroy. But the truth was, Leonard Lake was stationed at the Da Nang Air Base, where he repaired radar equipment. He was a radar technician, not a grunt out on search and destroy missions. He never went out on patrols, never roamed the jungle searching out enemies to kill. He was just a radar repairman, which he hated. The hours were long, and he was forced to work during monsoons. It was monotonous and tedious, and he convinced himself his wife was cheating on him back home with all the hippies and flower children of San Francisco.
His anxiety and depression became so bad that he saw a mental health expert who diagnosed him with impending schizophrenia and hysterical neurosis. Fuck, hysterical neurosis. That's crazy sounding. He was deemed to be a danger to himself and others and was shipped back to California to undergo treatment.
In January 1971, he was discharged from the Marines for medical reasons. Karen and Leonard moved to San Jose and struggled with employment, barely able to make ends meet. So Leonard began to pressure Karen to become a dancer at a local topless bar.
At first, Karen balked at the idea and refused. But as her financial situation worsened, she finally gave in. And she had to admit the money was good. Not that she could keep any of it, because Leonard would immediately demand she give him everything she had earned. He became even more controlling and would often beat her, calling it punishment. Disturbingly, after every round of punishment, Leonard would demand sex from her. He'd also force her to pose for nude photographs, submit to bondage sessions, and even have sex with other men when they swapped partners with other quote-unquote swingers.
Karen says that Leonard Lake considered himself an actual god, above the laws and morals of mankind. In fact, if a person would ever exclaim, "Oh, God," Leonard would answer them, "Yes."
Fucking hate that so much. What a jerk.
I can think of many more adjectives.
Can you imagine someone doing that? Oh my God. I just want to choke them.
The abuse and domination just got worse and worse. He'd throw her belongings on the lawn, force her to sleep in the car, until eventually she left him and they were divorced in 1972.
For years afterward, Leonard would stalk her, break into her apartment when she wasn't home, and destroy her clothing, burning holes in expensive dresses. He was bitter and said he was heartbroken that she had left him, failing to see that it was his actions which basically gave her no choice. And he'd say that all women, including his mother, had rejected him and he hated them all.
Chapter 3: Swinging Lenny.
In late 1972, Leonard Lake put a singles ad in the Berkeley Barb and received a reply from one Jennifer Gordon. The two soon fell into a relationship, as Jennifer herself explains it.
At first, he was like someone you see in the movies, sweet, gentle, caring. He seemed concerned, like someone you would really like to know. The intimacy turned kinky. I was stupid. Not naive, stupid. Our sex became aberrant. There was bondage and swinging. He liked to tie me up, taking pictures of me.
Lake started taking nude photographs of Karen, the images becoming more and more pornographic, and eventually Leonard convinced Jennifer to become a sex worker. She says he didn't violently force her, he just kept pestering her until she finally relented.
The relationship lost all sense of romance, becoming one based solely on sexual fetishes. Leonard began talking about how he wanted to make a snuff film. Jennifer had never even heard the term before and asked what it was. He explained it was a porno where one partner kills the other at the point of orgasm. He told Jennifer he thought it would be, quote, the ultimate sexual high, end quote.
Oh, talk about a red flag. And if this wasn't enough to scare Jennifer off, at one point he beat her and then held her head to the ground with his foot. And that was when she'd finally had enough and left him.
Leonard became obsessed with the idea of a nuclear holocaust, became convinced that it was bound to happen, and soon. It was a common thought at the time. Stanley Kubrick was famously convinced of the same thing, and Leonard decided to head north into the redwoods, where he could use his skills as a Marine to create a retreat in the wilderness to survive after the coming Armageddon, driving up the coast and into the town of Ukiah in Mendocino.
Interestingly enough, 10 years earlier, someone else had moved to Ukiah to escape the nuclear apocalypse as well. Reverend Jim Jones, establishing his People's Temple in Redwood Valley, before eventually moving his base to San Francisco and then on to Guyana, where nearly 1,000 followers would die from either suicide or murder.
Welcome to the Dead Podcast. I'm your host, Desi, and on this podcast, I discuss all things spooky and weird, from ghosts, demons, religion, to folklore, urban legends, true crime, and all things paranormal, with some horror movie reviews sprinkled in. So join me on this spooky ride.
Chapter 4: Lenny and the Hippies. Up in the redwoods, Leonard went to a music festival where he met a woman named Venus, who lived on an off-grid commune. They got to talking, and Leonard impressed her with his knowledge of alternative energy. Venus was in her 30s, single, an occupational therapist who loved living deep in the forest off the land. But it was hard work, and she needed help. Her cabin needed repairs, and she wanted to put in an orchard, so she took Leonard out to the commune that was called Greenfield Ranch.
Now, in my opinion, the Greenfield Ranch is very cool. It's my idea of how a commune can actually work. And you can go online and see stories from people that grew up there and said they just had an amazing childhood, like writer and game designer LaSarah Firefox. The place is huge, 5,600 acres, over 9 square miles. There's a 400-acre community area with a large barn, a ranch house, a pond, and school where everybody is free to go and hang out. But the rest of the commune is divided into 40 and 50-acre homesteads, which have to be bought. Yes, you have to buy the land you live on. Doesn't sound very communal, right? But it works because now each person has their own little world where they can live however they want, rule free. And I hate to say this, but it kind of keeps the riffraff away, if you know what I mean. I mean, not anyone can just come strolling up there and live there. And there's no main leader, which is very important if you don't want to end up with a cult. Instead, it's run by a board of landowners, each landowner getting their say and their voice heard.
But how are all these hippies surviving out there on that immense piece of rugged, raw wilderness? And how could they afford to buy their own parcels and pay the property taxes? Well, come on now. How do you think?
They were growing weed.
The late 70s and early 80s were a very exciting period for cannabis cultivation. It was the first time in history that the United States was beginning to produce its own large amounts of marijuana, making it a domestic product. Before that, nearly all cannabis products had been imported from Mexico, Thailand, Afghanistan, India, Morocco, and other countries.
Yeah, I used to always hear about Thai sticks, which I guess was a big thing in the 70s, like the best weed you could get. I mean, I don't know, it was before my time, but I always had all these old timers explain it to me. Apparently, and I could be totally wrong about this, all right? But Thai sticks were these sticks that were wrapped with really resinous gummy weed and then left to cure in a place with no oxygen. So they turned yellow. I mean, at least that's what I was told. But out in the hills of Northern California, where you could buy logged out land for dirt cheap, and I mean dirt cheap, like $10 an acre back in the 70s. Crazy. But, it was decimated land in the middle of nowhere. Well, all these hippies were gathering out there who'd acquired cannabis seeds from their travels all over the world. They had sativas from Mexico and Thailand, which are long, tall plants with thin leaves grown in warm tropical climates. And they had indica seeds from the Himalayas, which are short, bushy plants with thick leaves, very resinous, and from higher altitudes in a much cooler climate. And these hippies start cultivating them, crossing them, creating a new type of incredibly potent and flavorful marijuana with early strains of skunk, super skunk, northern lights. And by the 80s, you begin to see two different types of weed on the market. There's swag bud, which is imported mostly from Mexico, and the kind bud, either from California or from seeds created by California growers.
And the entire culture of both hippies and Northern California begins to slowly change. The first, back to the landers, just wanted to scrape by and commune with nature, live completely off the land, be humble. Being poor to them was a badge of honor. They used recycled building materials, drove old junked VW buses, grew their own food, and made their own clothes. But now there was this amazing new product they'd developed, this kind bud or skunk bud. The money was starting to roll in, and they loved it. Now they could afford to buy solar panels and have electricity for lights at night and a stereo. They could get their kids Christmas presents, get a four-wheel drive truck to motor through the muddy dirt roads, and pay their property taxes.
And it would be years before the California Department of Justice joined with the DEA and local sheriffs to begin the federally funded and much dreaded campaign against marijuana planting, or CAMP, which utilized National Guard helicopters to effectively terrorize hippie growers in Northern California. This was the golden age when all the fruits of the 60s counterculture were coming together in the hills and creating the finest cannabis the planet has ever seen. A whole new plant, really. It was amazing, and they were still filled with their hippie ideals of communal living and an alternative lifestyle more closely attuned to nature. They were living the dream, really.
And this is the world that Leonard Lake walked into when he stepped into the Greenfield commune.
Venus found Leonard to be charming and helpful, and he offered to work fixing up her homestead in exchange for room and board. He soon seduced her and then tried to get her to pose nude for him, which she adamantly refused to do, even when he showed her his photo album of naked girls he'd photographed, which she found disturbing, as many of them looked to be quite young. He also talked to her about how he was a survivalist, looking for a place to survive the coming nuclear war, when they'd need to not only be completely self-sufficient, but armed as well.
At some point, Leonard began digging out a hillside, which Venus did not like. It was an ugly, gaping hole in the earth. But Leonard explained it was for his Miranda project, and Venus assumed he was digging a root cellar to store perishables. And every homestead does need a root cellar, but as we know, the Miranda project was not about storing apples and carrots during the winter months. It was about imprisoning a sex slave.
Leonard invited his friend Charles Gunner up from San Francisco to help work on the homestead, which Venus found odd as Gunner was over 300 pounds and was hardly in shape for working on a homestead.
It seemed to Venus that Leonard was torturing Gunner, forcing him to take steep trails, making him move at a fast pace, calling him Fat Charles, and humiliating him. It struck her as strange that Leonard would call this man one of his best friends, yet treat him so cruelly. Leonard also told Venus that he thought it was disgusting that Fat Charles was receiving disability payments and that he beat his daughters.
And Lake began treating Venus cruelly as well, insulting her, making fun of her, putting down her hippie friends. They began to bicker and quarrel. And then one day, Leonard upped and pushed her off a ladder.
At this point, Venus just wanted Leonard gone, but she didn't see any way to force him to leave. So when Leonard offered to buy her interest in the property, she accepted and moved out. Leonard Lake was now an official member of the Greenfield Ranch commune.
Leonard found work with a government-funded firm building and renovating low-income housing and began helping himself to supplies for his new homestead. Again, this is a guy who says welfare recipients are leeches and should be shot, but he has no issue with stealing building supplies from the government.
Leonard immediately started trouble at the commune by breaking the bylaws, which clearly stated no firearms and no large-scale earth-moving machinery, by target practicing and bringing in an excavator to start digging out a hidden prison cell for Operation Miranda. He also started coming on to all the women, lurking in the community area and asking if they wanted to pose for nude pictures, even going so far as to proposition a 10-year-old girl for art photographs.
Why did the hippie community put up with this? Well, I think I know the answer. As peace-loving as they were all growing weed and being outlaws, and being robbed was a very realistic concept. So having an armed ex-Marine on the property, it does have its advantages. And he was a survivalist, meaning he knew all kinds of methods for self-sufficiency, which is what they were all about.
There were some very interesting and far-out people living there at the time. One was a guy named Otter, who also went by the name Oberon Zell, and was founder of the Church of All Worlds, which was based on the church in the science fiction book Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein.
A book which all hippies just love. The Manson family was all about this book and used to use the language from it like grok as well. The Manson family even wrote to Heinlein and told him they were fans. And, he's a cool guy. He wrote them back. And then they told him that he should join them and give them all his money. And he politely declined the invitation.
I forgot about that. I remember that now that you said that.
He
Otters.
and the main character was Michael Valentine Smith. So when Charlie had his first baby, he named him Valentine after
Yep. Oh,
the
Charlie. Otter's wife was named Morning
not his first
Glory.
baby. Sorry, I know people are gonna be like, that wasn't his first baby. Yes, sorry, was not his
Touche,
first
touche.
baby.
Otter's wife was named Morning Glory, and she was the high priestess of the Church of All Worlds. They were neo-pagans and no dummies. Otter had a degree in psychology and had been working on his doctorate before he heard the hippie clarion call. In 1968, he started the magazine Green Eggs and coined the term neo-paganism, and Morning Glory worked as the editor for the publication. The two wrote many books on neo-paganism and Norse folklore, as well as gave lectures and formed an online school teaching ancient wisdom and esoteric magic called the Grey School of Wizardry, which is still going strong. Morning Glory passed on in 2014, but they were together until the end. And at 82 years old, Otter is actually still going, still speaking and writing.
Leonard also had an interest in Norse legends and folklore and had considered himself an Odinist at one point. And he found Otter and Morning Glory just fascinating with their vast knowledge of ancient religions. And one day, Otter told Leonard he had discovered a lost process for creating a unicorn.
Yes, you heard that right. Old Otter, who considered himself an actual wizard in the lineage of Merlin, had rediscovered the lost process of creating a unicorn. By taking a baby goat and surgically altering the budding horns, he was able to have a single horn grow right from the middle of a goat's forehead, a practice he perfected with his goat, Sir Lancelot, a very cute and fluffy goat with a single horn growing from the center of its head.
Now, I'm not sure exactly how he did this, what he did, but as a former goat farmer myself, I can tell you that debudding or dehorning baby goats is very, very common practice. It's actually rare to see goats with horns, and they will try to butt you, and they're ornery as hell. But some goats are polysurates, meaning they have more than two horns. For example, there's the famous Austrian breed, Wehrhornsige, which have four horns. And some goats actually have three horns. It's a genetic trait. So what I think Otter did, I may be wrong, but I think he found a breed of three-horned goats that he was breeding, and he would simply debud the side two horns and let the middle horn grow. But he actually copyrighted the process in 1984.
The goat is very cute. If we can we include a photo of the goat in our
Hell
show
yeah, we
notes?
can.
All right. Leonard loved this unicorn goat, Sir Lancelot. He became obsessed with it. Was it because of the mystical qualities of the goat as seen through history, such as Pan, the god of shepherds who represented untamed nature, or the goat representing Lucifer, the light bringer, or the magical and supernatural healing abilities of the ancient unicorn? No, it was none of these. Leonard thought it would be a great aid in grooming young girls for naked pictures, thinking girls loved unicorns.
Leonard asked Otter if he could make the rounds with Sir Lancelot and was soon out and about with that goat, propositioning women and girls to pose naked with the goat, sometimes explaining that a white unicorn was a symbol of virginity. Not surprisingly, no one wanted to get naked with a stinky one-horned goat. And if you've ever smelled a male goat, you definitely know why.
Leonard even went so far as to take Sir Lancelot down to Los Angeles to the annual Renaissance Fair, trying to lure women into his clutches, aided by the unicorn goat. There's actually photographs of Leonard Lake in a tunic posing with the one-horned goat. We'll post those as well.
And meanwhile, Leonard was busy, grooming the neighbor's young daughter, Darlene. These are neighbors that weren't part of the commune. They weren't hippies. They just like lived next door to the commune. They're just good old fashioned country people. And disgustingly, Lake was somehow able to charm their 15-year-old daughter, Darlene. And he took her virginity, which is straight up statutory rape. A minor cannot give consent. I don't care how willing she was. And Lake told the young girl that he was going to marry her. He wooed her. And when her parents eventually caught on to what was happening, they sent her away to boarding school to stop the disturbing and highly illegal affair.
They should have pressed charges against him and had him arrested, which maybe would have saved an untold number of lives.
Yeah, yeah. Or gotten a local redneck to beat the living fuck out of him. There's an old hippie expression you sometimes hear out in the far distant hills of Northern California where there are no police and outlaws dwell. Be an expression that goes like this: violence is never the answer, unless it is.
And Leonard was also reaching out to other survivalists. He was obsessed with Soldier of Fortune magazine and ran personal ads using the pseudonym Tom Myers. He started corresponding with a 21-year-old U.S. Army soldier named Mark Novak, inviting him out to see his homestead. Mark visited the commune, but wasn't too impressed, seeing the lazy, weed-smoking Leonard as more of a hippie gun nut than an actual survivalist, and figuring if an actual nuclear war or insurrection were to happen, he had no chance of surviving.
And Leonard was still parading Sir Lancelot around, telling young girls he was making a calendar and asking them to pose with the goat, even making business cards that exclaimed, "The living unicorn," and eventually taking the unicorn goat to a Renaissance festival in Marin County. And it was here, in the summer of 1980, that Leonard Lake met the love of his life.
Chapter 5. Cricket. At the Marin County Renaissance Fair, Leonard Lake, draped in a hooded shroud, proudly displayed Sir Lancelot, the amazing unicorn goat, to the merry crowd of revelers.
"Behold, the wonder of the unicorn, Sir Lancelot, a magical beast of yore displayed for your amusement and pleasure. You are welcome to gaze upon it. Just kindly remove all your clothing first. Don't mind the camera."
And then it was as if time stopped, as, walking out of the mist, through the jugglers and bards, came a fair maiden in a dress of white frills, flowers adorning her flowing locks, with a mischievous glint to her pale blue eyes, and a sly, pretty grin.
The maiden adored the unicorn and lingered there, speaking with Leonard, unabashedly flirting, saying she worked as a teacher's aide, but was in search of a life of adventure.
The name of this fair maiden, so enraptured with the unicorn Sir Lancelot, was Clara Lynn Balaz.
So it says in the book Die For Me by Don Lasseter that Clara Lynn had the nickname Cricket before she met Leonard Lake, which makes sense. Cricket, Clara Lynn, it's alliteration. But in the book No Kill, No Thrill by Darcy Henton and Greg Owens, it states Leonard Lake named her Cricket because of the sound she made when they had sex. I mean, I have no idea, who fucking knows. But it was at the 1980 Marin County Renaissance Festival that Cricket and Leonard Lake would fatefully meet.
Cricket and Leonard were a perfect match. She had no problem posing naked for his pictures, loved being tied up, using sex toys, having multiple partners. You name it, Cricket was down for it. She was a 1970s free and liberated woman.
Yeah, and nothing wrong with that as long as everything is consensual and no one gets hurt. Cricket liked Leonard Lake so much, she even brought him home to meet her parents.
Back at the commune, things weren't so hunky-dory. Seems like there was a thief about, breaking into cabins when folks went to town, as if they were being stalked. And everyone suspected the thief was Leonard.
And then old Lenny somehow sets his shed on fire. being an idiot, and the shed was loaded with ammunition. So as the community gathered to put the fire out, a practice which actually brings a lot of neighbors and people together in the far hills and as a bonding experience. In this case, suddenly bullets started popping off from the heat and everyone had to go and hide. Not cool.
Then the real kicker, Leonard was finally caught stealing building supplies from his work, was arrested, and landed in jail for a few days. The last thing the commune wanted was heat from the law.
The Greenfield Ranch commune had finally had enough, and the committee of property owners unanimously demanded Leonard Lake leave. Fucking A, finally.
And Otter made sure he got his one-horned goat back, too. He'd copyright the procedure for creating a unicorn, and Sir Lancelot would go on to become quite famous, touring with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus throughout the mid-'80s.
So Leonard packed up and now, with the love of his life, Cricket in tow, headed even further into the redwoods, moving westward towards the coast to Philo.
This is a tiny, tiny, tiny town. Like, blink and you'll miss it. And at the time, there was only one motel, a little single-story structure with just 8 rooms called the Philo Motel.
So just to let you folks out there know how secluded this is, it's actually in the Anderson Valley, which also hosts the town Boonville, famous for having the world's first solar-powered brewery. And if you're into beer, you have to try their oatmeal stout. It's amazing. But anyway, this place is so secluded that they even developed their own language called Boontling. It was developed in the 1890s from a combination of Gaelic, Spanish, English, and Pomoan. Pomoan being the indigenous language spoken by the area's native peoples. An expression you often hear around there is ball hornin', which simply means good drinking. It can be used as a toast, a description, just a fun remark. Ball hornin'. All right, here's an example of boontling. Ready for this? Pookie waltered me a pooled to a tidrix for a ball chuggle on ZC's. That means I telephoned my girlfriend to go to a party for good food and coffee.
Oh, Jesus Christ almighty. So Leonard and Cricket are holed up there in the little Philo Motel, where the owner actually offers to let them manage the place and live there. Cricket gets a job at the Anderson Valley Elementary School as a teacher's aide, and Leonard became a volunteer fireman. He even donated books to the fire department about the handling of incendiary devices, one published by the CIA for their agents.
And on September 13th, 1981, Cricket and Leonard Lake were married. Leonard's best man being Charles Gunner, or Fat Charles, as Leonard demeaningly referred to him.
But Lake was soon to have a new best friend, also named Charles. Remember the army soldier Tom Myers who'd visited Leonard when he was on the commune? Well, he was part of an underground network of deviant outlaw soldiers, a brotherhood of military criminals.
I don't know, these guys, like, they think they're like some renegade patriots, but most of the time the truth is they're just scumbags in uniform. I mean, they're thieves and murderers. I don't know, like Timothy McVeigh was part of these kind of groups, the guy who blew up the FBI building in Oklahoma City. A lot of them are white supremacists and Nazis. I don't know.
Well, Tom knew a young Marine who'd escaped from jail after being caught stealing an arsenal of weapons from his base in Hawaii, and the young Marine needed a place to hide out and lay low. He asked Leonard if he'd be willing to harbor the fugitive, and Leonard replied, "Hell yeah."
The Marine on the run was named Charles Ng.
Immediately, Charles Ng and Leonard are best buddies, and immediately these two disgusting sociopaths go on a hardcore crime spree.
It's just nuts. Still having a bone to pick with the hippies at Greenfield Ranch Commune, they snuck up there at night and stole all their pot plants. Then they cased gun shops and pawn shops in the Bay Area, breaking into the stores at night, stealing an arsenal of weapons, as well as gold, silver, and other military equipment. They'd go target practicing, and Ing would say, "Wouldn't it be nice to blow someone's head off?" And Leonard would reply, "It sure would be."
They hatched a plan to snatch prostitutes off the street and use them for free sex. Leonard rented a cheap motel near the San Francisco airport and called an escort service. When the woman arrived, Ing leaped out of the bathroom, completely naked and brandishing a knife, savagely raping the woman on the bed as he plunged the knife into the mattress beside her head, Leonard looking on in approval.
But their fun and games would soon be coming to an end. Leonard had moved on from managing the Philo Hotel and was now working as the caretaker of a youth camp. Stranger danger. And well, Ing, ever the genius, had written a letter to Tom at his army base, thanking him for hooking him up with Leonard and telling him about all the fun times they were having together, and asking him to join their survivalist brotherhood. Ugh. The letter was intercepted by naval intelligence, who sent a swarm of agents into the redwoods to capture the fugitive Marine, Ing.
On April 29th, 1982, helicopters, trucks, and armed agents raided the youth camp, where they found automatic rifles, machine guns, pistols, dynamite, exploding bullets, throwing stars, brass knuckles, and over $50,000 in stolen gold and silver.
Fuck, man, they have been busy. That is some crime spree, man. Fuck. Leonard Lake was charged with 17 felony counts of burglary and grand theft and various weapon offenses. Charles Ing was flown back to a base in Hawaii, where he faced an 18-year prison term for conspiracy, larceny, burglary, and escaping custody.
But who, you may be wondering, was this Charles Ing? And how would these two men eventually rejoin forces to create a place of torture and living hell deep in the forest of the Sierra Nevada foothills?
Well, you're going to have to come back next week to find out those answers. And man, it just gets dark, dark, dark as the exploits of Leonard, Cricket, and Charles Ing become incredibly gruesome and disturbing.
Well, I find it hard to believe that it's going to get worse from the little intro that we got in this episode, but I know it will. So we'll see you all back here next week.
See y'all next week, and we want to hear from you. You got a case you think we should cover? Did we get something wrong? You just want to say hi? Drop us an email at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week for part 2 of the story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ing.